Hi everyone, this is Covid back with another episode of Beyond the Code by Typo. Today with us, we have an amazing special guest who is a seasoned startup CTO slash CPO. He has seen a startup journey from a 20 million valuation to a $2 billion valuation with lesson as a CTO. He has 17 plus of experience in leading software teams and building applications. Currently, he is working as a technical advisor and consultant with multiple startups. Welcome to the show, Chris. Great to have you here.
Thanks for having me, COVID. Great to be here.
Pleasure. All right, Chris. So, we'll be starting off with a cool fireside chat with you, where I and the audience would love to know more about you through different questions. Are you ready for the fireside chat?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. So, here's the first question for you. Tell us about the most important event of your life, like that defines you.
Yeah. Yeah, there's lots of things I could probably reference. It's kind of hard to narrow it down to one event necessarily. Um, but one significant event that I would typically talk about is moving out west, and took a pretty big leap of faith and left behind a lot of my family and friends back east, and really jumped out here without really knowing anyone or much about the area, frankly. Um, but in retrospect, it was a great decision, and really was a huge boost for my career, and got to work for some amazing companies out here that really didn't have offices back east where I was from. And being away also let me focus a little bit. I originally worked for Microsoft and then Amazon, Uber, and then Zillow. And being out here allowed me to have a little bit less distractions, a little more of kind of a blank slate, and kind of carve out a new path in life. And that path has been focused around tech and the outdoors and meeting new people. Met some great friends out here that I otherwise wouldn't have met if I didn't make the move, and actually met my wife out here, and started my family out
That's
here as
amazing.
well. So it's been quite a kind of pivotal point in my life as I reflect back a little bit when I actually made the decision to come out here. But definitely a good one. And I miss a lot of my friends and family back east very dearly, but all in, it's been great living on the West Coast.
What do you love most about the East that you don't find here in the West? I'm sure you would have spent your childhood and growing up teenage over there, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I moved out here kind of in my late 20s, so I had a pretty significant chunk of my life that was on the East Coast. Well, I mean, the family and friends are the main thing, and a lot of the people I knew back there. There's sometimes a bit of a directness about the East Coast that I appreciate. There's a little bit different food culture there, and kind of cuisine options, although cities have homogenized a little bit over the years. But I think there's some different food options, and I don't know. I think the main differences are really just around kind of the general attitude of folks. I think people are a little more laid back here, a little more reserved. They get a little more of that directness on the East Coast, which I appreciate. I think I carry that with me. It actually helps me at times. But broadly speaking, it's the same country. It's not a wild
Cool.
difference between the two coasts really these days.
Cool. Amazing. So tell us about your first experience. How did you get into tech actually?
Yeah. So I was always inspired by what technology can do. And, I was an early adopter of the internet back in the 90s, kind of really dating myself here. But I studied programming and management in school, and more specifically, I got really into software in my grad school years. And I was actually a DJ during that time. This kind of my source of income when I was in school, and that led me to learning graphic design and then promoting a lot of my events. And that led me to building a production company that had a pretty comprehensive website with event listings, and forced me into learning technology. So I learned, PHP and HTML, CSS, a little bit of JavaScript, and web servers and analytics, and kind of everything I needed to do to basically promote events and keep the website maintained. And I just really became fascinated with what technology can do at that point. And that led me to go a lot deeper in my studies. I did a lot of like continuing education and kind of nights and weekends programs, and got my first job as a product manager back in Philly and at a technical company. And I just really kept progressing from there. every company I joined, I would take on little side coding projects. I still kind of do projects for fun on the side today. And it's really a never ending pursuit. There's always something new to learn. And, obviously with AI now, there's like a whole new era of things to understand and learn and dive
Yeah,
into, which
yeah,
is
yeah.
exciting. So yeah, it's been quite a journey, but, way back in the day, believe it or not, it was being a DJ and promoting events that initially got me started in actually hands-on kind of coding and building applications.
I like that's one hell of a transition. I mean, a DJ turning into a tech leader. If you look at it, I think that's amazing. I'm sure that that would have definitely brought a lot of different aspect and perspective of how you look at things when you lead teams, when you do your work on day to day. I'm not sure how it impacts, but that's a different transition that I've heard very lately.
Yeah. No, it was a lot of fun when I was in college. It was a great job, right? It beat a lot of the other jobs that my friends were working at the time, and I did internships in the summer, more professional internships. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. It led me down the very beginning of this path. Is kind of where it started when I really think about it. But quickly, the professional world took over, and I sort of
Yeah.
a lot of that type of work and just really focused once I finished grad school and so professionally.
What about now? Do you still play sometimes?
On occasion, yeah, I'll dabble here and there just for fun. Just at the house. No desire to go play gigs or anything like that anymore. It's purely just a hobby at this point.
So how do you usually unwind your day? Like how when there is a lot of work, hectic day, then you come back home. What's your go to then?
Yeah. It varies by the day a little bit, and depending on family activities, can change a little bit. But I guess I tend to be a night owl a little bit more by default. I've become more of a morning person with kids, but I generally like to put some closure to the end of my day. And I actually kind of find it relaxing to work a lot of times when there really aren't other folks online. And as a busy professional, you can either carve out early mornings or late nights essentially to focus. I feel like you kind of have to pick one when you're
Yeah.
sandwiched between meetings all day and usually just bouncing around from conversation to conversation. So I usually find that time of night, and I really like to carve out my next day as much as possible, kind of prep call notes, set up any meetings that are needed, catch up on the email I might have missed, and sometimes do some deeper work, or at least frame it out for the next day is usually what I like to try and do. And what I find that does sometimes is it will sort of allow things to sit in my subconscious a little bit while I sleep and let my mind kind of solve some problems while I'm sleeping. A lot of times I'll wake up, with insights or kind of thoughtful approaches to what I was ruminating on. But try and stop working at least an hour before bed just to, wind down and, usually read before I actually go to sleep. It's typically my pattern. But that's basically my routine. It varies a little bit like everybody. And I try not to get, super dogmatic about, how I handle it. I think, not putting too much pressure on yourself is also important. But yeah, that's the basics, I think.
Cool. I think it was great knowing you, and thanks a lot for being honest here and telling us from where you came, what you did, what you like. Now, I think I
Yeah.
would love to, and the audience would also love to know more about what you did in your career, maybe some success, some failures, your experiences as a CTO. So I think let's get started with the main section where we talk to the new age CTO.
Sounds good.
All right. So my first question. So as a CTO at Lesson, and probably you have been wearing this hat now multiple times, there have been multiple challenges that would have come across when you are into this responsibility and this role. Tell us about some of the major challenges that you have seen as a CTO, and how did you overcome those, and share some hands-on advice there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think big picture, if you zoom out, the job of a CTO or any technical leader really is to translate the business strategy into engineering strategy, right? And how you actually do that, I think, depends a little bit on the company size and the stage of the company. I think if you're in the earliest stages, you're really going to be operating as a lead developer and a system architect and maybe managing a small team to execute. When you get to that next phase of a growth stage company, you'll typically be more focused on hiring and guiding the team to follow best practices and, taking on more of a leadership role. then as you get to the later stages, I think, it shifts again where, you're really working with your peers to make sure you're investing in the right areas, setting the culture, keeping teams aligned, and really working towards achieving business goals in the broader sense. I think you're delegating a lot more as you get to kind of managers and, department managers and this sort of thing. But in any of those phases, I think it really breaks down to three primary aspects. The way I think about it is people, process, and product. So people is really the most important part, right? Companies kind of nothing without their people. And it can be easy to forget this as a tech leader, especially as you're deep into technology. But aligning your team's passion to the growth objectives of the company is super important. I mean, there's really no more important job than that. And, focusing on helping people find satisfaction in their work and in their career and really helping people grow in their career is really one of the most important jobs. And I think focusing on that is super important. Work is such a huge part of our life. I think you really have to love this part of the job as a manager. And if you don't, or that's not appealing to you, then, maybe management work isn't really the right profession. And that's okay. And there's lots of, technical leaders that can lead in other ways than our people managers. But the people is really one of the biggest parts. And I talk about that a lot when I'm reflecting on what it means to be a technical leader. I think the next
Yeah.
thing is process.
True.
Um, and kind of setting up the rhythm of the technical organization, aligning the tech team with the broader company objectives, creating a process to set expectations and hold folks accountable. And this can come in the form of goals and OKRs or managing to a delivery schedule that needs to be published by the team, or kind of a variety of other ways. But I do think having a system by which people understand kind of how they're being evaluated and, what the expectations are is really important. Um, and as a leader, as a CTO, you're ultimately going to be responsible for kind of setting up, what those expectations are and what the rhythm of the business should be, and how you're going to drive performance in your teams. And what I found is that high performers, want to be held accountable. They want to know, what the rules of the game are, so to speak. I think there's nothing worse than, being surprised or not where you understand your expectations were and having a miss. And, then you're in a whole, kind of people management debacle that you don't want to be in. So I think it's important to be clear about that and set up a process that works for people to grow within and know what is expected of them. And then lastly is product, really leaning into prioritization and having a business lens with it is sometimes a new area for folks that have really come up from the technical side. But you have to really be thinking broadly about the organization and the company to help make good prioritization decisions inside your team and what your team's working on. It's a lot about architecture and, building the right foundational pieces so that, the platform can grow and flourish. I think ensuring you have the right investments in infrastructure and DevOps to create a great developer experience. So, you're able to move fast and people feel like they're working in a system that is modern and doesn't get in their way. And then I think just weighing on priorities and making sure that tech debt, architecture, projects are fairly represented. And having that kind of broader view of the product, I think is really important as a leader when you're thinking about the product part of all this. And then there's some challenges I could probably talk through as well, if that's interesting, or up to you where you want to take it from here.
No, I think the 2 points that you have touched upon, one is translating the business strategy into a technical strategy, and then dealing with people, process, and product. Like these are like quite in itself quite broad domains to talk about. I'll try to take them one by one because I have something to really understand there. And I have been hearing this from a lot of CTOs now. Like translating the business strategy into tech strategy is one of the biggest challenges they see. Uh,
Yeah.
just throw some light on how you as a CTO, let's say at Lesson or other companies, have done that. Can you just give us some example where we could like the CTOs who are listening to you could relate to that? Okay, yeah, this is the scenario we are exactly into, and this is how we can translate some of the business goal and vision into the technical strategy that we are looking at right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it really it requires you to kind of take a little bit different view of maybe work than you have in the past. If you were previously an engineering manager, an engineering director, and now you're in this CTO role, and I think there's two aspects. One is looking at it from a business lens that may be a little bit different. I think the other is just really understanding the impact of your leadership and your words and your communication to your organization. On the business side, I think the big change really is that you have to think about the company holistically. It's no longer just about the technology. And sometimes that can be at odds with how you may have thought about things in the past, because what is the best thing for the overall business may not align with really what you would like to do as a technology leader, or, what you'd like to prioritize, or the projects you think, would be kind of fun to work on. That no longer is the right lens to really look at things. So I think keeping the business unblocked, helping fueling growth, making sure you make the right investments, and you end up having to look at things from a little bit of an ROI perspective, which I think is a new lens for people. Like, truly, like, how many dollars did we spend to deliver this part of functionality or this part of the platform? And that generally isn't the way in a lot of organizations anyway, how you look at things. It's more headcount. I've got projects, and I'm, maybe using agile, and I'm running through my sprints, and I need to deliver things by certain dates. But when you start looking at things from an ROI perspective, and you ultimately own the budget, that's where I think, your view will start to change a little bit. So,
Yeah.
it comes back to really understanding the business well. Like, you have to be much
I
more of a
think
business
that's
person, I think, than you were before.
right. I think that's very true. And I don't think a technical strategy would just come out of a 2 days of thinking and you are through with it. There are a lot of aspects that you need to look into to really say that, okay, we have to come up with this strategy and this would work. But one most important part I feel is the understanding of the business. So what kind of questions a technical leader should ask themselves and their business counterparts when they're thinking on those lines of building a strategy for the team? So can you just highlight those few questions probably which you would be asking?
Yeah, I think as you're trying to kind of make that translation, I'm a big believer in starting with goals, right? And having goals at the company level that are aligned across your peer groups. And that means with marketing, with sales, with your CEO, with, other departments, operations, if you've got an operations heavy style company. And those become kind of the backbone for how you empower your teams. And the way I like to operate is to then allow my teams from the bottoms up to create their goals that, have a level of review, but are owned and kind of independent by each team. And then the projects within should, not be surprises, but generally should be things that are coming from the bottoms up. So the teams are figuring out how to get to those goals and how to achieve what you've laid out as the objectives for the company. And that framework, I think, is the best way to sort of break down the strategy. And then there's usually a review process that's in there, right? If getting into the specifics a little bit, if you're going on a quarterly cadence and you've got quarterly OKRs you're setting, having teams come up with their objectives, their OKRs at the team level, along with the projects they'd like to prioritize, having a review session with leadership, maybe making some tweaks, maybe making some prioritization changes, making sure that the dots are connected between the different teams. Because oftentimes the theme becomes sort of the glue that pulls
Yeah.
together a lot
Yeah.
of teams. So I think it's goals and themes. Really, I should have mentioned that themes are the other really big part, and that's like at the level of leadership you probably want to stop. You don't want to get down into the weeds of individual projects and individual work that you want to see done. Sometimes that's okay; it's inevitable. If you're using the
Yeah,
product and you're thinking about it all the
gain
time,
some
it's
context,
inevitable.
like you have to understand some of the initiatives that have been taken up. But yeah, I get your point, what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, you really want the teams to come up with it, because I think that empowers them and gets them excited and gets folks, really eager to work on what they've concocted and what they've dreamed up. So
Makes sense.
I think that's important. Yeah. You kind of also have to understand your impact a little bit as a CTO. I think, one of the biggest changes from kind of the managerial level to the executive level is you have to be a little more thoughtful about some of your decisions and some of your statements. The more senior you get, the more weight your messages will carry. And it's important that you're consistent, right? You need to be a carrier of the vision for the organization. You need to be aligned with your peers and your CEO and how you describe strategy and priorities. I think it's, a situation where you have to be a little careful about half-baked comments or things that, you haven't really thought through, because people sometimes will take that as direction and as, sort of guidance of what they should be working on. And then that can cause problems in your organization, especially if you're misaligned with, say, something the CEO said or something the sales team's talking about. And, that can create confusion and a lot of churn inside the team. So, it's you want to be approachable, you want to be transparent, but you also want to be thoughtful about, sort of giving guidance and direction. And I think sometimes you even need to specify to say, this is just a suggestion or a random observation. This isn't a go do. I think actually clarifying that when you're talking to people from a leadership level, I think is actually really important.
Totally, that makes sense. Cool. I think that's on the technical strategy being formulated. When it comes to like leading teams, actually you have to enable your dev teams, you have to enable your engineering managers, your like senior managers to actually lead their teams better. So how do you exactly do that? What kind of leadership style do you take up, or what process or framework do you have in mind to actually lead and enable teams?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. You know, I've been talking about it a little bit already, but I really like to
Yeah.
lead with the theme of accountability and autonomy. I think in order to empower teams, there's really three things you have to have. You've got to have a system for accountability, you've got to have team autonomy, and you've got to be able to articulate and make sure everybody understands the why behind what we're doing.
Yeah.
And I'll actually talk about that last one first, since I haven't talked about it much. And I think as a leader, that's one of the most important jobs, is to repeat the why and really make sure that it lands with people. I think when people really understand the why, they can work through almost any how. And that's part of your job as a leader, so that people feel inspired, so they're excited about what they're working on. They understand how their work ties to the bigger picture, to business goals, to hopefully the impact the company's making out there in the world. And I think you have to deliver that with some passion and conviction. And you need to legitimately feel that way about what you're working on and what you're doing. And I think when you are able to articulate that and put that out into your organization, people are going to perform at their best and be the most excited. And it's just a lot more of a fun work environment when everybody's aligned. You feel like you're working towards a little bit of the greater good and something that is beyond just the scope of the specific, task or, bug that somebody's fixing. Um, so I think that why part is really important. And I talked a little bit about the autonomy and kind of how to break that down and how to
Right.
set clear goals at the top and have teams kind of build that from the bottoms up. I think, there's a little bit of like just the right amount of pressure in there that's important. I think periodically, usually on a quarterly basis, doing some level of sort of public review of our accomplishments from the previous quarter, and what the plan is for the upcoming quarter, I think does add a layer of kind of healthy pressure, right? To sort of
Yeah.
discuss
Yeah.
things
I
in a kind of a
understand.
more public forum. I think demos are another really big piece as well. When you talk about accountability, I think allowing frontline engineers to show off their work, whether it's weekly or biweekly basis, to the broader organization, I think that can create, a little bit of a healthy, situation where people feel ownership and feel like they need to
Yes,
deliver
the
something by a
accountability
certain
comes
time.
in there. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So, yeah, those are some of the big things I think, but autonomy and
Makes sense.
accountability are kind of the themes. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. And now moving on to the product part, like when you are moving down building the product, there has to be a development process for that, and that has to not only work for the customers, for the consumers, but also for every stakeholder that is there in the system, and that includes your dev teams also. That probably includes investors also. There are a lot of things when we talk about stakeholders there. So how do you create that product development process that falls in line with each and every stakeholder in the system?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a couple aspects to it, and I've talked a little bit about this, but there's a combination of tops down and bottom up that I think really needs to be clearly defined as you're figuring out how to set up a product development process. As I mentioned, I think top level company goals and themes are what leadership should really be responsible for, communicating that clearly, making sure that's aligned across functions. And then from a bottoms up perspective, I think team goals and timelines for delivery are really like the responsibilities of the individual teams. And then as you kick off individual projects, a system that I've developed with some others over the years that I found to be really successful is what I call the 4Ds. And it's discovery, design, development, and distribution. And for kind of epic level projects, these aren't task level items, but, bigger projects that, usually measured in, 1 to 3 months, having projects go through those phases, I think is really important. And that point between design and development, I think, is one of the ones that needs to be kind of clear. And you want engineering involved in the front half of the process, and you all obviously want product involved in the back half when development's actually happening. But there is a little bit of a point there of you need to have things clear enough and requirements specified well enough and technical design figured out well enough before you go off and start coding and building something in the wrong
Right.
direction. And that isn't to say that, you shouldn't experiment or build things quick and kind of get things out and fail fast. Like that mindset needs to be there as well. But I think even in those scenarios, you want to have sort of an abbreviated version of that where, what you're building has enough alignment, enough agreement, and that can be done in the course of a day or two potentially. But there is a clear kind of handoff there where it's like, okay, this thing's ready to actually be built and ready to be coded. So that's like in the weeds a little bit with like the product development process. I guess the other thing I'd mention are principles. I think having principles for decision making is really important. Amazon's very famous for this and it's very baked into their culture. But cultural values are important. I help write the cultural values for Lesson. And I think those are really great frameworks to have conversations with people on your team and as you're considering priorities. And I think the other set of principles that's useful is a set of product principles that help you make decisions and help you make trade-offs. Because often you'll be faced with something that has some ambiguity and there's a lot of different ways you could decide to do something. But if you've got a clear set of principles that help you make trade-offs between potentially opposing forces or different considerations, those can be used as a framework a lot of times to help accelerate decision-making and really push decision-making down.
So you talked about making people in place who are taking the decisions. That's what I understood from what you said right now.
Mm-hmm.
How do you prefer that happening? Like, should it be a collaborative effort or should it be an individual person assigned who is going to be the decision maker taking all the calls there? Probably they are the product
Yeah.
managers. How does it work out well? And what according to you have seen working out well for the teams?
I actually think that's a pretty important piece. And what I found to be successful is really defining who the ultimate decision maker is for a given area. I think breaking that down by area is important. You can't go feature by feature or project by project, but if you look at a given section of the product, a given group of features, I think it is important. And it often is a product manager that ultimately owns the decision there. Another framework I've used or have described in the past is sort of this concept of 49-51. And if you've got say an engineering leader and a product leader who own a given area, for certain types of decisions, it's going to be 51% engineering, 49% product. For other types of decision, vice versa. And, broadly, it's usually the more technical oriented platform decisions live with engineering, but you want product involved, and vice versa. The more product oriented customer facing decisions, ultimately somebody needs to be the decision maker, and that's usually on the product side. But engineering leadership should be right there. 49 is, not zero. It's, equal partner. But if it comes down to like, there's a disagreement, there's got to be a clear owner, I think. And that just helps teams stay unblocked and move fast and continue to iterate. Because without that, you can just end up in kind of, analysis paralysis and decision fatigue and a lot of wasted time.
One more important thing I have been thinking about this lately. So this is an ideal thought process where we say when the engineers are getting down to thinking about product as a product manager, then that's when the best products come out, right? But
Yeah.
honestly, I mean, I have definitely talked to a lot of engineering leaders and I have been listening to this a lot. What do you think? What kind of traits are there in those leaders or in those team members who actually exhibit this kind of a feeling where they're really connected with the product? They're actually involved in the product development process from the point where requirements are getting defined and then they're feeling accountable for whatever they are delivering. They're not just stopping after delivering a feature. They're looking at what product metrics are moving after they have delivered something. So just let
Yeah.
me, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think it really comes down to the culture that you build in your team and as an engineering leader or as a product leader for that matter. Again, it goes back to empowerment. I think, making sure that your teams have the safety, psychological safety, if you will, to be able to discuss whatever it is that they think is important for the product, for prioritization, that should be worked on, but also understand the broader business context of what the goals are for the company, what the goals are for the team. And, I think there is a need for management in some of these cases to kind of be the filter and to be sort of the decision maker in some cases when things need to get escalated. But you really want folks and engineers specifically to understand enough of the business context to where they can kind of almost make the decisions themselves if they, are able to. So my experience has been if teams are moving kind of in their optimal cadence and moving well, the pace of iteration is really fast when teams are able to make decisions and kind of run on their own. And I think if you can build that kind of culture, and I saw it really at a couple places I worked, but specifically at Uber, when I was at Uber, there was really, a lot of empowerment inside the teams, and teams were moving super fast. There was a lot of freedom to run and build features and create new experiences. And sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't. And I think you
Mhm.
have to build in that experimentation culture and that ability to test out ideas in kind of the lowest cost way to get it out to customers, to get feedback and be
Right.
able to, make an informed decision with some data. And then, I think sometimes there is a little bit of subjectivity that comes into play, which isn't necessarily bad. I think, at some point in the process, it does come down to a decision, and there is a little bit of, you could call it bias, but just, kind of subjectivity in somebody's experience or what they believe to be the most important, direction to go in that comes in. And that's okay. Not everything can be completely data driven and completely metrics driven. You want
Totally.
that as much as possible, and you want the anecdotes to match the data is really the key.
Absolutely. It's probably it has to originate from the kind of culture the leaders, the management pulls in. But I
Mhm.
also feel that when we talk about accountability and giving them autonomy, defining their success as we do for a product team, if we do it similarly for the engineering team, would really, really help. So, I mean, from that,
Yeah.
I would like to understand from you how you define the success of an engineering team and how you have seen the best of the teams thriving with what kind of goals and what kind of success metrics, I would say, in the
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah, and I think again it goes back to goals, and are we focused on outcomes over output, right? And if we're moving the core metrics for the organization, for the team, like those are going to be the ultimate measure of success. And then I think there's specific things for the engineering team, the door metrics. I think the space framework is added a more of a qualitative aspect to some of that, which I think is really important. And a lot of those things: deployment frequency, cycle time, time to restore, failure rate, like those all do matter. I think are worth measuring. I think there's context that needs to be added to that as well, so that it's
Yes.
not just a pure A to B, and if it's up, it's good. I think it needs to be considered with everything else that's happening in the team, and maybe some of the nuances of your deployment cycle or release cycle or what have you. But at the end of the day, I think are you meeting your commitments to stakeholders and customers? Right, is what you should ultimately be
Yeah.
evaluated on. And if you've got good goals in place, you should be able to align the work the team's doing with the goals that the company has and the team has. And you should be able to pretty clearly understand if things are moving in the right direction. I think some other indicators that are maybe not talked about as much in a business context are the team health. I think is the team well-being high? Do teams feel safe? Do they feel like they can communicate with one another and speak their mind and have an opinion about what's happening in the company or the organization? I think happy teams are productive teams, right? And you can
Right.
measure this through things like retention and attrition and internal NPS. There are ways to kind of measure this a little more quantitatively, but there's a little bit of just a qualitative kind of feeling as a leader. You should have an understanding of how your team's performing and how they're feeling in general. I think that building a culture where people feel like they can do the best work in their career and they're growing and they're having fun along the way, I think is ultimately what's most important. We spend so much of our time at work, and we should enjoy it. And I think
Absolutely.
that's an
Absolutely.
element too that's sometimes overlooked in some organizations. So
Um, I'll just ask one last question that is related to defining the goals for the engineering teams. Uh, can you just give us a few examples of those good goals which really seem to have worked for engineering teams?
yeah, I mean, I like to organize goals in two buckets: company level and team level. And I think if you start veering into having department level goals or group level goals, I think it can get really messy really quick, and you can end up with a lot of fatigue around which metric to pay attention to and who's responsible for what. So even as organizations scale, I mean, even, multi-100 person organizations, I think, you want company level goals and team, like, atomic, two pizza team, 10 person team goals. Um, so at the company level, they're going to be the business drivers. They're often going to be related to revenue and growth and retention and churn and,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
onboarding of, maybe one side of the marketplace to the other. It depends on the business, obviously.
Right.
So
Right.
those are in place. But then at the team level, the more atomic level, it's like, okay, uh, I, I think breaking those down into two buckets is really how I think about it. One is project and one is business. And in an ideal world, you have mostly business goals, and then the projects are sort of fitting underneath those to drive
Right.
that metric. And you can get away with that in a lot of instances, but oftentimes there is a big release, a big new set of functionality, some, very clear customer driven, new set of features we need to add. And that becomes a project goal. And that's okay. And having those set up in such a way that you're trying to get something done in a given quarter or given time period, I think are
Yeah.
important. But, you know, I think the business side, if you can break down one of the larger goals to something that your team can directly drive, I think is really important. So you have to understand what drives, say, a revenue goal or a churn goal or a retention goal that may have at the company level. You have to kind of break that down to its granular parts. And if you're working on the communications platform, you're going to have a different goal than somebody who's, working on an infrastructure platform, than somebody who's working on, the front end client portal or what have you. Like it depends a little bit on the team, I think, but being able to have that line of sight between what you're doing at the team level and what's happening at the company level, I think is super important because that ties everybody's work directly up to what is important to the company.
Perfect. I think, yeah, I think that's a good way to define goals for any team, and particularly for engineering team also, which most of the time is enabling some product or business metric. So breaking down into a project and then to associating that with the business goal that is going to get enabled with that is a perfect way to look at it.
Mhm.
Cool. I think, Chris, this was a really interesting conversation, and I think this is one of my longest podcasts that I've had. I would definitely love to have you back for another episode, talk on more topics with you. But for
Sure.
today, I'm really, really thankful. And so would our audience be. Anything
Yeah.
that you would like to say as a parting advice to our audience?
Um, I don't know, nothing top of mind that we haven't chatted about, other than to just say to not forget to have some fun at work. I think, I mentioned it earlier, but we spend a lot of time with our colleagues and with our coworkers. And I think when spirits are high and people are in a good mood and everybody's sort of feel like they're working towards the same mission, it's just a lot more fun and you get the
Yeah,
best work from people and it's much more enjoyable. And that's sometimes overlooked, in business context. So don't forget to have fun.
totally agree, man. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this advice and for all the insights that you have shared today. Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, COVID.